As people are living longer, it's important to consider how the later half of your life is going to be in regards to physical, mental, and financial well-being, as well as simply what you want to do with all of your extra time. This week on the podcast, Michael Clinton joins Gail to discuss the concept of the new longevity and other ideas explored in his book, Roar, into the second half of your life before it's too late.
Well, Michael, welcome to the Creative Genius Podcast. So I'd love to know a little bit about your background and then what led you to write the book Roar into the second half of your life before it's too late.
Thanks, Gail. It's great to be with you and to see you again. I spent about 40 years in the magazine publishing business in New York City. I was the longtime publisher of GQ. Then I was a senior VP, exec VP at Conde Nast. Then I went over to Hearst, where I was on the team that launched Oprah's magazine, and we launched Food Network and HGTV and built out a lot of brands. And I was, for the last 10 years, the president and publishing director of the company. And I had a great, wonderful career. As I like to say, I was maxed out. I was ready to sort of think about what's next. And as I was doing that, what I was reading and listening to and hearing out there in the world at large was, well, are you going to retire? Are you going to wind down? And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not on my agenda at all. I don't even like the word retire. It's a false construct that was created by the government 90 years ago. And, people before that used to work and then they died. I mean, they worked until they died. So I said, I'm ready for my next act. And I started to do some homework and I said, I want to write a book on this subject. And part of it was really to get something off my chest, quite honestly. But what was interesting is I found, I interviewed 40 people and I found people who were very like-minded. And since then, I found many, many, many more people who, like yourself, who have said, I'm far from finished.
Yeah.
And the other thing that sort of tied into that was this concept of the new longevity. If you're 60 and healthy, you're going to probably live to be 90. And if you take care of yourself, that's a whole lifetime of, another 30 years of living. And, at 70, another 20, 30 years of living, et cetera. So we can all accomplish a lot more than, you'll pardon the expression, sitting around and or playing golf.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the book was really designed to sort of stimulate that thinking for people in terms of this concept of the new longevity in combination with all the possibilities in the second half of your life. So that's what took me there.
Well, I love it. And thank you for speaking for all of us who are in the more seasoned years of our life. We'll just say it that way.
Yeah.
Well, what does ROAR stand for?
So when I conceptualized the book, I didn't want it to be homework. Because a lot of people groan and go, oh, okay, this guy's going to lecture me and so forth. I wanted to be informational, entertaining. I wanted real practical tips and action points that people could follow in their own way, in their own life, in their own pacing. So ROAR is an acronym. It stands for how do you start the R's, how do you reimagine and the reimagination process for yourself. The O is owning your numbers, owning your health numbers, your financial numbers, owning your age, owning, all the numbers around your life. The A is the action plan, and that's, life layering is the core to that. And then the R is the relationships that you have, because so much of what you're going to do next is going to be, you're going to have to rely on support in your community and your family and your friends to really help you get to where you want to go. So the book was in 4 parts and had component parts. And I love the feedback I've gotten from people when they say, your book is a blueprint. It really is a nice blueprint for me to follow. And it's not homework, and it's not, it's too, up high in the sky, if you will. Mm-hmm. So that's the ROAR concept.
Well, I love it. And I remember you sharing at the retreat when we saw you earlier this year that you were getting ready to, I think, run a marathon, and you are, again, seasoned, meaning a few years under the belt, but in a very healthy way. And it's very obvious that you're mentality has not slowed down, even though you have reached this level of maturity and you have just so much to offer. So I really appreciate you being this, I would say, just the leader in this particular area of that all of us should be concerned about at some point, and probably a lot of people aren't even thinking about until they hit about 50. But
Right.
it is a very vital topic that really should be covered, because I don't believe people need to act old, look old, be old at whatever age they are, 60 plus.
Yeah. Yeah, no, thank you. I think I've become the accidental role model. That wasn't my plan, but I'm proudly wearing the moniker, because what I've realized, and I like to make, the new longevity movement is really a social movement.
Mhm.
It's really being driven by people who are redefining the second half of life. And I always make the analogy that the women's movement, in the 70s, when it really changed the role models for women as to who they could be and how, what they could become and the choices they could make about their lives. Today's 25-year-old woman looks at so many different kinds of role models that she can choose from and say, I want to launch my own business. I want to be a CEO. I want to be a senator. I want to be on the Supreme Court. Pick your ambition. What I'm hoping is that people like me and others are creating the role models for not just ourselves, but for younger people who
Mhm.
look at us and say, oh, I didn't realize you could do that at 60. Oh, I didn't realize you could start a new career or launch a new business or run a marathon or, pick whatever subject it is. So I think it's important, there's this great line, Gail, you can't be it unless you see it. And,
True.
right? And think about so many of the role models that are already there in the celebrity culture. Oprah just turned 70.
Mm.
She looks amazing. If you look at Jennifer Lopez, she's in her 50s. If you look at Cindy Crawford, she's about to turn 60. I mean, the redefinition of what 60, 50, 60, 70 looks like is changing before our very eyes.
Mhm.
And the behaviors that go with that, the possibilities of things. I was just at a graduation ceremony for a friend of mine. She just graduated from veterinary school and she's 60.
I love it.
And, she said, you know what, I'll be a veterinarian for 20 plus years.
Sure.
And that's perfectly fine. And another friend of mine who's 90 just got remarried. So, it's creating the possibilities of what might be and then figuring out what works for you as an individual. So that's the exciting part.
I think it's very exciting. And I think as long as we don't look at it as a number that we should stop like a stop sign, and just look at it as just, okay, we've got to make some changes here, but those changes hopefully will be positive things and healthy things for us as we go into our sunset years.
Yeah.
So what is the new longevity?
So, the new longevity is now a concept that is sort of hitting, I'll call it the global zeitgeist. And it is this recognition that, let me step back. 90 years ago, the average life expectancy was 62. There were 7 million people that were 65 or over in the United States. Today in the United States, the life expectancy hovers around 80. In Asia, it's almost 90, in Japan and Korea and so forth. Today in the United States, we have 60 million people who are 65 or over, and we'll have over 80 million in the next 10, 15 years. People are living longer because of medical advancements, because of healthy lifestyles, because of, people aren't smoking as much, people are, paying attention to nutrition and exercise and fitness and all of that. And it's created this gift of extra time, this new longevity that is scrambling everything up that used to be perceived as what you were at 65. And as you know, I'm doing a lot of writing for Esquire and Men's Health and others. And I wrote a piece called Why 65 is No Longer the Number. Because we've been programmed that you're supposed to stop at 65, right? And I would say the new longevity is just the opposite. Rethink that.
Mm-hmm.
And you can go onto our website, roarforward.com, under the Thought Leadership tab and see that story and other stories around the new longevity. I joined the Stanford University Center on Longevity board, and I think we talked about this in the past. Today's 5-year-old has a 50% chance to live to be 100. So the 100-year life is going to be normalized, maybe in our lifetime, but certainly in our children, our grandchildren's life. It's not going to be a quaint news clip on the local news of Mrs. So-and-so who just turned 100 and is not a novel idea. It's going to be more normalized, and there are going to be more and more people turning 100. So this has huge impact for individuals and cultures and society and business and media. So it's part of this. It's the social movement that we talked about. So yeah, that's the new longevity.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what is the outdated archetype?
Well, we could do a whole hour on that. What happens in media representation and advertising representation is, moving slow, the images of people who are like moving slowly into the sunset, holding hands, petting the cat, very, old-fashioned dressing. The problem is a lot of creative is done by people in their 20s. And what happens is they default to stereotype because, they're not 50.
Right.
And so you need more people. It reminds me of the Mad Men era when you had a bunch of men sitting around the table deciding what women, wanted in advertising and with the image of women. And then that all changed. You need 50 and 60-year-olds around the table to say, wait a minute, what you're showing is so stereotypical and so wrong and just so bad. And so the old archetype, they were all built, when life expectancies were in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And so the new archetypes are being built by more progressive companies, media brands, et cetera. And I think you're going to see that. I'll go back to the women's movement, the similar analogy. If you look how women were depicted in advertising in the 50s and 60s, you shudder when you look at it today. It's going to be the same thing with people over 50. It's going to be a very new archetype that's going to be created.
Well, thank God for that.
No kidding, right?
Right. Well, you're officially one of the reimagineers that you talk about. What are some of the adventures that you've been pursuing besides the going on these hip fitness quests?
So I believe, we use the word refire or rewire in the book. And, when I was 64, I went back to school and got a master's degree from Columbia University. I was interested in nonprofit philanthropy and all of the topic. And I became a student again, which is, lifelong learning is so important. You don't have to go get a master's degree, but you have to constantly be learning new things. It keeps our neuroplasticity going. And the more complex, the better, because that's what keeps brain health. When the idea of doing a crossword puzzle is not the answer, that does not stretch your brain. It's an old-fashioned idea. If you talk to scientists and medical people, crossword puzzles that doesn't do it. You got to do complex things like study a new language or, take on a new topic that you're exploring. Or in my case, it was going back to school. So one example, I became an entrepreneur, Gail. I launched a business off of the Roar book, and roarforward.com is an entrepreneurial business with a team of 6 people. And so I became an entrepreneur, in a very not planned in the long-term strategy. So there was that. I think you remember the story. I did a 9-day hike to the Everest base camp and ran the Tenzing Hillary Marathon down. So I did that just to show that I could and that I can continue to push my boundaries physically. And so those are just some examples. I think the reimagineers, we talk to them about people who are reinventing, rethinking, and it doesn't have to be as dramatic as going to Everest by any means. What is it that works for you as an individual? And taking a first step in that space is really what it's about.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think at this, when we get to the season time, this is the time we have that wisdom to bring to what we're doing.
Yeah.
And maybe because we have the wisdom is from looking backwards and realizing we could have connected those dots differently, but we learned a lot from whatever we went through. So that gives us that opportunity to explore new things. And I know
Absolutely.
I started this business at 52. So that was not exactly a young age to start a new business, but it
Right.
was what I did. And
Yeah.
here I am several
Yeah.
years
No,
later.
great example. Great example.
Yeah.
No, great example.
So what is
Yeah.
your goal? How old do you want to be when you grow up?
I'm going for 100.
Oh,
I'm going for 100. Listen, I think if you pay attention to your health span
mhm.
and you pay attention to your wealth span, then you have great lifespan. And I another story I wrote for Esquire was called "You're Going to Live to Be 90. Congratulations. How are you going to pay for it?" And I think this notion of having the financial resources to live a nice life.
Mhm.
Of course, when I give speeches around the world, the country and the world, I always ask people, how many want to live to be 100? And I get, a decent amount of hands. And then I say, how many of you would like to live to be 100 if you had your wits about you, your mental and your physical quality of life were, operating at a high level? And all the hands go up.
Mhm.
Because what we don't want, obviously, is to have a horrible, sort of back end of life experience. So if you take care of yourself in multiple ways, you can have a very long, healthy lifespan and do a lot of the things that are important to you.
Mhm.
And I think that, that's track that I'm on. That's how I think in terms of the rest of my life. The other good news, which you probably know, the older you get, and the healthier you are as you get older, the longer your life expectancy tends to be.
Mm.
So some of the science I've read is if you get into your late 60s and you're healthy, your life expectancy is pushing well into the 80s already.
Mhm.
So, that's a really interesting phenomena in terms of the compounding effect of healthy living and, doing good things for your mind, body, and spirit.
Mhm.
So, so now that I'm sort of all my family teases me and says, well, you have to live long because you're preaching this. So like if something happened to you and you drop dead, that would not be good for your message. I'm like, you're right. So I'm going for 100.
Okay. I think 100 is a really good target.
That's a good number.
So what do you want to do to celebrate your 100th birthday?
Ooh, that's a good question. I watched the first 100-year-old man cross the finish line of a marathon.
Ah,
It was the Toronto Marathon, which I had run. I'm not so sure I want to run a marathon at 100. I'll be honest. But
okay.
We'll see. But, there are other physical things. I mean, there's an amazing woman named Betty Brussel who just turned 99, and she's breaking all kinds of records as a master swimmer. So I want to be agile and balanced and, physically fit in whatever shape that is in at 100. So I think for sure I want to do that. I want to be a lifelong learner. I always want to be learning. I always want to be exploring. I always want to be traveling. I always want to be spending time with my family and friends because community is so important to us as we live longer. So I think there's an alchemy there that can keep us very engaged as we live longer.
Well, maybe you'll be jumping out of an airplane at 100.
Could be. I did that when I was 19. I swore I'd never do it again, but I might do it at 100.
Well, it might be worth it. Maybe that'll be the way you go.
There you go.
Go quickly.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, how is the new longevity affecting the economy?
Oh my God, it's a huge subject. Here's some stats that will, today, 35% of the population in America is over 50. And if it was its own country, the spending power is $8.3 trillion. It would be the third largest country in the world. And in 2030, the first millennials start turning 50. That's in 6 years. That's pretty astounding when you think about millennials turning 50, right? And that spending power goes to 13 trillion.
Wow.
And so, and all of the wealth in this country, about 70% of it is held by people over 50. Stocks, bonds, real estate, all the above. So it is an enormously powerful economic group that oftentimes gets ignored by marketers, which is a big mistake because of just the sheer, you touched on it earlier, we have the people in that group have less, they're pretty much done with child rearing years. They hopefully have accumulated some money. They're spending it on themselves. They're traveling. They're buying products across all categories. It's having a huge effect on the economy and will for decades, because in the generational transfer of wealth that's going to happen over the next 20 years, the Gen Xers and some millennials who are inheriting the next wave of money, they're going to move into their 50 plus years as very different kinds of consumers. Mm-hmm. So you want to tap into that group because, overall as a group, they're going to be a very wealthy group. Obviously, not everyone is going to have that experience because you'll always have inequities. But overall, the numbers are pretty powerful, powerful.
How do you think this new longevity is affecting the world of interior design?
Well, the numbers we see, all of the renovations and all of the design expenditures and even the new home buying is all happening in the 50 plus. That's where the action is. And, I think I shared with you a story of some neighbors who I met recently where he's 90 and she's in her 80s and they just built a new house nearby. And I said, wow, this is pretty amazing. Tell me why. And they said, well, because we can. And we also wanted a modern house that was very high tech. And, I took a tour. It was a beautiful design. They hired an architect, they hired a builder, they hired a designer. They spent a lot of money on the highest end product. And, to me, that was just a great example. Oftentimes, the thinking has always been, well, I have to go chase that younger consumer because I might have them as a long customer. And that's good. And of course, you should develop new clients. But I would argue that people over 50 are doing a lot of expenditures in that world. So tap into them because they might renovate in their 50s and renovate again in their 70s and then build a new house when they're 90. So, that could be a long trail of a client retention, as opposed to chasing a 25-year-old who has no money.
Exactly. And it's funny that you should say that because my husband and I just in the last 6 weeks made a contract. So we're building a house and we are putting everything we want in it and we're not going crazy. But
That's great.
My husband, this is the time when I really want to do the house the way I want to do it. I want new furniture. I want draperies. I want all those things. And why save this money? We don't have kids, so we have the opportunity to really enjoy our lifestyle. And he was all for it. So
I love it. Great example.
It's really
totally great example of what I'm talking about. I think you're going to see more and more of this, in general.
I think so too. How can interior designers capitalize on this? Because since, like you said, if you think about it, you've got such an opportunity. If people have 25 or 30 years left, and you're right, and a lot of people move every 7 to 10 years, you've got probably 4 projects with somebody at the very least. And I know, for example, in my situation, I actually said to the person that worked with us on the selections for the house, I said, oh, let's go ahead and put blocking in the walls for future grab bars just in case. And it is a 1-story this time. So we're moving out of a 3-story into a 1-story.
Yeah.
And we're thinking ahead because we know that it only makes sense to do that. We hope we never need that, but just in case it's going to be there. But obviously, I come from design, so that's what I'm doing. So how would you direct everybody else that is in the field but really wants to serve this audience?
Yeah, I think some of the things that you just described for yourself are very practical and make a lot of sense. And of course, those are things to consider just in terms of long-term strategy. But I think the headline I would give is don't treat people like they're old people.
Right.
Because if I'm, and I have many, many examples of anecdotal examples of friends and so forth, when they're doing new design in their home, whether it's hard goods, appliances, redoing kitchens, bathrooms, software with materials, etc., they want the newest technology, the newest innovation. They might have a sensibility for sustainability. They really want to be learned consumers, and they also have the money to spend. So they treat them as if you would treat, anyone that you're doing business with. Age should not be a filter. I have another couple of friends who we know through our families who are in their 80s, and they live in New York. They have an apartment in New York City, and they are rebuilding a house in Oaxaca, Mexico. Mm. And they're in their 80s. And she's actually in the design space as a designer and of tabletop and flatware and so forth. And they're doing like exactly the way you described it. They're doing everything that is top of the line, the newest technology. They're very tuned into materials. And so I think don't make the mistake of using age as a filter when you're working with a client. And that I think is a way to capitalize in on this being longevity.
I think it would be a great idea for some people to be focusing on that particular market and marketing to that. I think there is so much potential out there.
Yeah. Well, the analogy I would use, I'm writing a story right now. I just did the interview with Men's Health, for Men's Health, the world's oldest fitness instructor. He is 81, but he only trains people 60 and older. Mm. So his niche has been to keep people healthy, and it might be something in stretching and balance and weight training. And so take that concept in the in the fitness business and translate that over to the design business for second, third homeowners, new homeowners who are in their 60s or 70s who want to trade up. And I think the other thing that's happening is people aren't necessarily scaling down. They are also scaling sideways, and they're scaling up, and they might be making a choice like you. I don't want 3 stories anymore. I'll go to 1 story. So I think those are other ways to tap into it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes. And as a matter of fact, that is exactly what we did. We're scaling up. We're going 2,200 square feet to 3,700 square feet because we're ready for some more space, and we want to have that freedom and flexibility within the space that we have. So it's a different mentality now. And I wasn't sure my husband would be on board with it, but he jumped right on. He said, okay. So what would you tell your younger self at 25, knowing what you know now?
Well, first of all, I didn't really, when you're 25 and you look at 60 and 65, it's like really, it feels really old, and it felt really, and the people that were 60 and 65 at that time did live outdated archetype lives. So I think, and I talk to a lot of young people about this who are 25, who are very anxious and have a lot of anxiety about their career and what are they going to do, and the pressures from their peers, and I'm like, stop. You're 25. You may live to be 90. You have a longer runway. You do not have to boil the ocean, in the next year or two, the way my generation did. We felt like we had to get on a career path. We had to, find a partner. We had to have children. We had, if we chose to have children, we had to buy a house. We had to do all that before we were 30. Mm-hmm. And today, I think there is much more of an elasticity to that, in as well as making choices that you don't ever want to get married, or you don't want to have children, or you don't. I've got plenty of people in the family, myself included. We have no children, and many people in the family who are in their 20s and 30s who are making decisions they don't want to have children. And if you go back 40 years, it was really hard independently to make those kinds of decisions. but now it's very, so I wish I had the foresight, but I didn't have enough wisdom to sort of break through the cultural barriers that were there to say, oh yeah, I can do a lot of different things. So I would have probably, I wish I had that wisdom. So now I'm trying to impart that wisdom to 25-year-olds.
I love that. That's great. Well, somebody needs to do that because I do see a lot of anxiety in the younger people right now. And we have a lot of people we serve in our community. Some are in their 20s and 30s, and you can see the angst on their face.
Right.
I really feel for them because in the end, you've got to really enjoy life along the journey. And the journey is meant to be not easy, but if we take our time and make good decisions based on values, we're going to be happier. So can't be based on money and all of the things that would please other people. We need to please ourselves.
Exactly right.
Well, what are 3 takeaways you'd like to share with our listeners today?
I think the top takeaway around this conversation is release yourself from self-imposed ageism. Mm-hmm. Self-imposed ageism, it's changing, but we still get so many cultural cues around aging, and therefore ageism is embedded in a lot of our culture and society, and what we get, the input we get from the world around us. It's just the opposite in Asia. If you go to Singapore, you go to Japan, once again, there's a whole different attitude about it. But if you release yourself from self-imposed ageism, the byproduct of that is you don't get stuck into this thing of, well, that's not age appropriate. You get stuck into a vision that it's person appropriate. That in fact, you may want to build a house, a new house in the second half of your life. You may want to do many things that you're holding yourself back from doing. And the barriers are your own. So release yourself from those barriers. And that's part of the R, roar, the reimagination process. I think the part 2 of that is reimagination and reinvention is possible at any age. You can do it at 30, 50, 70, 90. You can reimagine your life and your life path at any age. And oftentimes we, once again, put that barrier in front of us and say, well, I can't do that because. And then my last takeaway would be, you are probably going to live longer than you think. So are you prepared for that? Are you prepared do you have purpose? Do you have a reason to get up in the morning? Are you healthy? Are you watching your numbers? Are you looking at your financial security? Are you prepared to live a long life? Mm-hmm. And once again, if you're healthy, you may live a much longer life than you think. And you often hear these stories of people saying, I didn't think I was going to live this long, or I didn't think or I'm afraid the number one concern is people are afraid they're going to run out of money. So are you prepared? Are you doing the things that are going to give you, a nice and lovely life as you live longer? And that may mean you and I are from the same bolt of cloth. We want to work forever and do our, respective businesses forever. You may want to work longer, but doing something that you really love and you're passionate about to make additional money, etc. But be prepared to live a longer life because it's here. It's here. I
love it. Well, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your book. And I'm so glad you're doing what you're doing. And I do encourage everyone to read the show notes. Go check out Michael's website, read his articles, and join the movement because honestly, it's huge. And I think the opportunities are amazing for all of us. So, Michael, it's a pleasure.
And sign up for our newsletter. It's a freebie.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Michael. And we look forward to seeing you around, hopefully in New York.
Thanks, Gail. Great to see you.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, Michael, for your insightful discussion on the podcast today. Whether you're younger, older, or in the middle, it's important to consider what aging looks like for you. And if you're a designer, this is an important market to consider. Join us next week on the podcast as we wrap up Season 10 with an emotional episode about moving past your fears.